הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. My name is Stewart Ain. Every week at this time, we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. Today, we're going to be continuing our discussion with Meryl Ain. Dr. Meryl Ain, she's an author, and she's a writer, the author of The Takeaway Men, and also with Ellen Backner Greenberg. She is a writer and the co-founder and president of the Descendants of Holocaust Survivors. Thank you both for staying with us as we do a second half of our program. I wanted to ask you, Meryl, you have written, you called it a post-Holocaust book because it starts at the DP camp, the displaced persons camp, and then they leave and they begin a life in the United States. But what has reaction been from Holocaust survivors who've read this book?
Again, I'm so gratified that survivors and children of survivors and grandchildren of survivors indicated to me that I got it right, that I did not paint either the survivors or their descendants with one brushstroke. And I should say right now that I am not the child of Holocaust survivors, but the topic is something that I have been immersed with since I read the Diary of Anne Frank in the 6th grade. I went on to become a history teacher. I have researched this topic. I am still researching it. I have friends. We've had close family friends who are Holocaust survivors who I have interviewed. I have many close friends like Ellen who are 2G, and they all informed my research and inform my writing. I thought this was a very important story to tell because if you go back to the time period that I was writing about, there really wasn't much interest in this topic right after the war, either from the culture in general, or even so much from the Jewish community. First of all, there was no word Holocaust. I mean, we didn't get the word the Holocaust until the late 70s, and there was really no word survivor at that time either. They were called either refugees or greeners, and the ethos of America at that time was just let's move on after the war. So the GIs were coming home, they were going on the GI Bill of Rights, they were starting families, they were buying homes. New businesses were booming, and it looked like everything was very, very rosy. And the culture was really more interested in communism and looking for communists than in being concerned with Nazis. And in fact, the US government invited 1,500 former Nazis to come to this country to work in either the space program or the nuclear program or to track down communist spies. So the people came here and they had a very difficult time acculturating, and they didn't have anywhere near the interest or the support that we thank goodness think of now.
I wanted to ask you about the Holocaust. Today we're taping on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Why do you think people should be remembering the Holocaust? What is the importance of that? it happened so long ago?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. Number one, it was the most horrific example of brutality and evil in the history of the world. And, you know, as a history teacher, I can tell you that there have been and still are many examples of evil and brutality. But this was beyond what had happened before, and thankfully what has happened since. So in and of itself, it's important to remember it. It's also important because I think it is a cautionary tale for today. So the questions that I wanted to raise in the book, specifically, how do we treat people who are different? How do we treat immigrants? What do we do when we see evil in the world? Do we turn our heads? Do we stand and watch? Do we speak out? Do we take action? I mean, that is so important. And when people do nothing, this was the extreme example of what could happen. And, you know, as a history person, it's shocking to me that Hitler took power in increments, and people just let it happen. And I think we have to be vigilant. I think we have vigilant. We have to learn the lessons of the Holocaust. So to answer your question, in and of itself, it needs to be remembered. We need to remember the victims, and we need to remember the survivors and their families. But we also need to remember it because of what it can teach all of us about discrimination and hate and prejudice and evil.
I'm thinking about the attacks on Asians that have been going on now here in 2021. At 22, it continues, and I'm thinking of these men who were they were at the front door of a I think it was a hotel, and an Asian woman was being attacked outside, and I remember you can see from the camera that was taking the photos of what was going on that they closed the door. And they kind of walked away, and nobody came to this woman's rescue. Now they were subsequently fired, but that I think is a problem, not just with these people, but we've seen it in the past. I mean, it goes back years. That lady who was attacked in Queens, and nobody came. Remember that?
Yeah, I think that happens when we view people that who are different than we are as the other. And one of the steps that many Holocaust organizations, museums, and centers have taken in the last several years is to link the lessons of the Holocaust to bullying and racist and discrimination and hate. And I think that is very valuable, because whenever we look at someone and say he or she is different than we are, it's the other, and that's the root of it, instead of realizing we're all one human family.
Let me go to Ellen for a second. Ellen, you're writing a memoir now.
Yes.
And do you think you'll include some of the lessons, or is it basically going to be a story recounting what happened in terms of your parents?
Thank you for asking. I started off by writing I've been thinking about this for several years, and I keep journaling, and I decided to write an article, and it was published, and I heard from people all over the world, and I wrote several others, and I just keep moving on. I'm blessed that I have my parents' testimonials. I don't have to imagine what they went through. I know. And I'm combining that, their testimonials, with the facts. For example, like, I know now the day my father got to Auschwitz. And I thought about it. What was my father thinking when he was there? He was standing there, 1,400 people arrived in his transport. 1,200 of them were taken immediately to the gas chamber. He was one of 200 watching. He's standing there watching. He's seeing the smoke, knowing that his mother had been murdered there. So I turned to the lessons that my father taught me, how he lived his life, and what he says in the testimonials. So it's not just about showing a map and saying my father was here, he was there. It's about the understanding of the day-to-day, and also about me as the child of survivors. What was it like for me growing up, embracing it, and most importantly, the lessons that I learned from my parents. I am so blessed that my father, went through hell and did not come out bitter. He was the most incredibly optimistic person. He never complained. He had MS for 40 years. He had lots to complain about, but he never did. And that is, so much a part of me, and that's important. The Holocaust doesn't only have to be about learning. I mean, yes, it's critically important to learn about the horrors and how to, prevent them from happening and what to do as human beings. But there's also the legacy of strength that is so important. One of the many things my father said is, no one's going to hand you anything. How you make your bed is how you lie in it. And it never hurts to ask. The worst they can do is say no. He was a survivor. And those are all really important lessons. And, I just wrote a chapter last week about a dinner party my parents had with their American friends. They assimilated. All their friends were Americans, but they were not denying the Holocaust. They were talking. They were really both sides of it. And at this dinner party at their house, their friends are asking them, well, why didn't you fight back? Why did you go like sleep to the sheep to the slaughter? And I'm upstairs hearing this, horrified that they had, not only did they not have an understanding of what happened, if you want to know and understand, you ask, what was it like? You don't accuse. So, my understanding of what it was like, and for them, and for as Meryl was saying, that the Americans didn't really understand and know what it was like. And I remember who was at that dinner party, and years later, everybody embraced my parents, and my father was asked to speak to schools where his friends were the teachers and principals, and my parents didn't harbor resentment that their friends didn't understand. They were patient and helped them understand, and that was very important to be able to understand. I just, if you don't mind, I want to say something. Meryl was talking about the importance of teaching the lesson to not be a bystander. Absolutely. What's interesting is that as the child of survivors, I have always had trouble standing and watching. And I think that's common. When I see somebody, and I've only thought about this recently, when I see somebody having trouble with a cane crossing a street, I find myself going there. When I hear somebody yelling at a child, I find myself just running over. It pains me to hear that. And I think without being told by my parents, that's what you have to do, that's innately what we do. I guess we wish that people had been there and done that for our families.
Yeah, people are also saying the Holocaust and then talk about other atrocities, and
Mhm,
they're kind of comparing the Holocaust to
mhm.
others. And I've heard people say, "Oh, you cannot compare it," and other
Correct.
people say, "Well, not so." And what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. Um, the word Holocaust comes from, I guess, Hebrew Shoah. Shoah is a burnt offering. The Holocaust was about burning, cremating Jews. So there is not, you want to talk about other genocides? Absolutely. There are other horrible genocides, but they are not the Holocaust. And the problem that I have with comparing and likening is that you can't water down the meaning of the Holocaust. You can't water down that there was only one Holocaust. And I pray to God there's never anything on that level again. And am I sensitive about that? Yes, I am. Again, even if I'm not, by definition, it was a burnt offering. There are other horrendous, situations, and I find that children of survivors and survivors are always, not always, typically um, very moved and outspoken to try and do whatever they can to prevent other atrocities.
Meryl, you and Ellen are both members of the International Advisory Board for International Holocaust Survivors Day. It's going to be established on June 26th. And I'm wondering, why do you think another day is important in terms of the Holocaust? So I mentioned we're taping on Yom HaShoah, and there are others. January 27th, I think, is the international. You set up by the UN International Holocaust
Mhm.
Memorial Day. Why another day, Meryl? And then we'll go to you.
Okay,
Ellen,
I,
you're both on it, so.
I think, I think it is important. I do agree that we have many holidays, but those that we have are really to remember the Holocaust and to remember what happened to the victims. So today, everybody is lighting a candle or posting candles on Facebook, or there are all kinds of programs all week actually going on in different Jewish organizations to remember the Holocaust. But yes, we need to always remember the 6 million victims. There's no question about that. But we also need to remember the survivors. And as we mentioned earlier, um, they were not even acknowledged for years. There was no word survivor. There was no. So the survivors are incredibly resilient, courageous. They came here. Many of them actually achieved great success, and then a number of them had great difficulty, and we ought to be cognizant of that. There are different Jewish organizations. I know UJA Federation and Lend a Hand, who are providing help to survivors in need. So you've got a whole spectrum of survivors, and they need to be acknowledged. And also, the number, unfortunately, of survivors is just dwindling every day. So yes, I do think we need a day to remember and honor the survivors.
Ellen?
Um, you know, somebody asked me this question yesterday, and Yom HaShoah today is a day of mourning. We say Kaddish. There's Hebrew prayers, and Jewish rituals and memory can't always only be about mourning. It's important to celebrate, just like there's a Mother's Day, a special day set aside to honor and respect mothers. this is not about mourning the loss. This is about celebrating survivors. And the first time I heard about this from Jonathan Ornstein, who is head of the JCC in Krakow, Poland, when he told me about it, I said, wow, that's brilliant. Why wasn't there this years ago? And he said to me, you're not the first person who said that. It's like a simple idea that's obvious that I wish had been done, for my parents and other parents to get the covet, to get the honor of being recognized. I think it's very important to honor their resilience. I mean, what they went through and they were able to get up and move forward, that deserves to be recognized.
Well, how would you like to see it recognized? What kind of things do you think should be done on June 26th? What are the...
It's unfortunate that we're still in this pandemic where things are not fully opened up. They're Holocaust survivors, even any small token of recognition means so much to them individually. I've spoken to a couple now through Zoom and whatever. When you listen to their story and they know somebody's interested, that means something to them. So, the committee is talking about different ways to do this, to do it virtually. And I'm sure we'll come up with something very meaningful and to honor them and make them feel good, and they deserve it.
When survivors, right after the war, it was very difficult for them to talk about it. First of all, nobody even wanted to hear about it. They wanted to move on with their lives, wanted to start their lives for the survivors and make a home for themselves and whatnot. And eventually, sometimes it took many, many, many years before they started to talk about it. And then they started to go to schools and whatnot. Would you say most of the survivors out there today are not afraid to talk about it and are talking about it, or we still have some hesitancy?
I can't speak necessarily of those who were still alive, but in the past, there are probably, not scientific research, there are many, many survivors who were not able to talk about it. And I understand that. Once you open up the floodgate and start talking, who knows where you can go down. The survivors that are still alive now were probably child survivors. So many of them were hidden children, and I know a lot of them that do talk. It's a different story. It's still traumatic. There's loss, there's separation, but it's a different story. And they were young. A lot of them, like I spoke recently, as you know, I interviewed Abe Foxman, who was a child. A lot of what he went through isn't necessarily in his memory that he experienced it, but it's something that he's been told. It's certainly a big part of him, and he's very open to talk about it. So many of the child survivors, the war started in 1939, let's say. So they might have been a couple of years old. It's a different story for them, and it's probably easier for them to talk about than for the older survivors was.
There was a discussion recently about the Holocaust, and it was titled, "Whose Story Is It to Tell?" Meryl, what do you think about that?
Okay, I think we all have to tell the story, just like we all have to tell the Passover story, the Exodus from Egypt. But I think some of us who are closer to the story have more of, I don't know if the right or privilege to tell it. So I would say survivors, number one, children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors, and so on. but I think that each of us has a responsibility to tell it. So and I don't think you have to be Jewish to tell it. So I am Jewish, and as I mentioned, I am not the child nor grandchild of survivors. So what I did in telling it, and I've also, besides my book, The Takeaway Men, I have previously written many articles and opinion pieces about it. I do meticulous research. I made sure that all my facts were correct. So all the historical background is correct. All the characters in my book do something that might have been done. It's not invented from whole cloth. So, and I also rely on my friends like Ellen and others. So, and you know, one of my things I was most gratified by was that my 2G friends and family of survivors friend said that I got it right. So I think in telling the story, I think it's the responsibility of all human beings to tell the story, but we have to get it right. We can't make up stuff. And sometimes you see that people embellish the story, or they take literary license with it. And I don't think that you can do that. And I think we've got to keep this story accurate, because if we don't, then we're just we're doing disservice to those who experienced it, but we're also opening the door for Holocaust deniers. So I think we have to be scrupulous in how we tell the story, but I think we all need to tell the story.
You've been doing more than 50 programs with different groups across the country. I'm wondering, is there a common question that most people are asking about your book and about the themes of the book?
I'm actually not going to take the positive questions because that's boring. Okay, I'm going to take the challenging questions, and people have a lot of difficulty. Some people with my character Aaron. You know, why was he so morose? Why was he mean sometimes? And we cannot understand what was in the minds. And I think Ellen said that before. We don't really know what they experienced, but we know what the outward actions were. So he went through the Holocaust. So that, I think, gives you, I don't know if it's a pass, but it certainly explains his behavior. The other big question I get, and you'll again have to read the book to find out, is who is a Jew? And people really have very definite opinions on that subject.
Okay, well, we'll have to find out what that means as we go. Let me thank you both very much. It's been another very fast half hour. Meryl Ain and Ellen Greenberg, thank you so much. This has been Jewish Life. Until next week, my name is Stewart Ain. Have a good week.